Picture this. March 4th, 1945. The Battle of Iwo Jima has been raging for 13 days, turning 8 square miles of volcanic rock into what Marines would call the bloodiest battle in Corps history. Corporal Marcus Chen, a 22-year-old from Seattle's Chinatown, climbs toward Hill 362A with his squad from the 5th Marine Division. They're hunting caves, the endless network of tunnels the Japanese have burrowed into the island's volcanic rock. At 14:47 hours, Chen radios his position to the platoon sergeant. Moving to investigate rock formation approximately 50 meters north of Checkpoint Delta. Appears to be cave entrance. At 14:49 hours, when the sergeant tries to confirm, there's no response. Search parties sent immediately find Chen's rifle leaning against a rock formation that shouldn't exist according to any geological survey of the island. For 76 years, that rifle will remain exactly where Chen left it, weathering typhoons and volcanic eruptions, waiting in plain sight for someone to finally ask the right questions. Until 2021, when a joint U.S.-Japanese archaeological team conducting surveys for the battle's 76th anniversary discovers that the rock formation isn't volcanic basalt like the rest of Iwo Jima. It's something else entirely. Something that predates the island by millions of years, and carved into its surface in symbols that match no known language is a message that will change everything historians thought they knew about March 4th, 1945, and about what might be buried beneath one of the Pacific War's most sacred battlegrounds. Marcus Chen had grown up in the shadow of Seattle's Pike Place Market, the son of immigrants who'd fled China in the 1920s. He'd enlisted on December 8, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor, driven by the same desire that motivated many Asian American servicemen to prove their loyalty and defend a country that didn't always treat them as equals. His letters home to his sister Ruth painted vivid pictures of Marine training, the voyage across the Pacific, and the hell of amphibious warfare that had taken him through Tarawa and Saipan before landing on Iwo Jima. His final letter, written on March 3, 1945, the night before his disappearance, contained observations that Ruth would read and reread for decades. Ruth, this island isn't natural. I don't mean the fortifications the Japanese built. I mean the rock itself. It's wrong somehow. Too old for a volcanic island. Too smooth in places where it should be rough. And there are formations that look artificial, like someone carved them a long time ago and then let nature cover them up. Our geologist liaison officer says it's just unusual volcanic formations, but I don't think he believes it. I've seen him taking samples when he thinks nobody's watching, sending them somewhere for analysis. Tomorrow we're pushing toward the northern part of the island, clearing caves. Part of me doesn't want to go into those caves. Part of me feels like they're not just tunnels the Japanese dug, like they're entrances to something older. But orders are orders. If I don't write again soon, tell Ma and Ba I did my duty. Tell them I love them. Ruth Chen would frame that letter and hang it beside Marcus's photograph. When she died in 2019, her will specified that both should be buried with her, keeping her brother's words close even after death. The Battle of Iwo Jima had begun on February 19, 1945, when 3 Marine divisions stormed ashore onto black volcanic sand defended by 21,000 Japanese troops commanded by General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. The Japanese had spent months fortifying the island, creating an underground network of tunnels and bunkers so extensive that aerial bombardment barely touched them. The Marines expected to secure the island in 5 days. It would take 36, cost nearly 7,000 American lives, and leave psychological scars on survivors that never fully healed. By March 4th, the battle had reached its bloodiest phase. The Marines were advancing through the northern part of the island, encountering fortified positions connected by tunnel systems that allowed Japanese defenders to appear and disappear like ghosts. Hill 362A, where Marcus Chen would vanish, was one of the most heavily defended points, offering commanding views of the surrounding terrain and concealing caves that intelligence estimated connected to tunnels extending throughout the island. Chen's squad had been assigned to cave clearing duty, dangerous work that involved approaching suspected tunnel entrances, calling for any occupants to surrender, and then using explosives, flamethrowers, or grenades to neutralize defensive positions. The mortality rate for Marines conducting this work was staggering, but it was necessary if the island was ever to be declared secure. At 14:45 hours on March 4th, Chen's squad approached a rock formation that their maps didn't show. It appeared to be a natural outcropping of volcanic basalt, approximately 3 meters high and 5 meters wide, positioned at the base of Hill 362A's northern slope. But Chen noticed something the others missed. The rock's surface was too smooth, showing patterns that suggested tool marks rather than natural weathering. He radioed his observation to the platoon sergeant, who told him to investigate but be cautious. Chen approached the formation with 2 other Marines, Private First Class James Walker from Tennessee and Private Thomas Hayes from New York. According to Walker's account, given to investigators later that day, Chen had walked around the rock formation, examining it closely, running his hands over its surface. He'd found what appeared to be a seam, a crack that suggested the rock might be hollow or concealing an entrance. But when he tried to peer into the crack, something happened that Walker couldn't adequately explain. The light changed, not darker or brighter, but wrong somehow, as if the wavelengths of sunlight striking the rock had shifted into spectrums human eyes weren't designed to perceive. Chen had jerked back, startled, and then leaned in closer as if drawn by something he couldn't resist. Walker had called out, asking if Chen was okay. Chen's response, delivered in a voice that sounded distant despite being only a few feet away, would be recorded in Walker's statement. "There's something inside. Not a cave. Something else. I can see symbols, writing, but I can understand it. How can I understand it? It's not English. It's not Chinese. But I know what it says." Walker had moved forward to pull Chen back, concerned his squad mate was suffering heat stress or combat fatigue. But before he could reach him, Chen had simply stepped forward and disappeared. Not into the rock, through it. As if the solid volcanic basalt had become permeable for just a moment, allowing passage to somewhere else. Walker and Hayes immediately opened fire on the rock formation, thinking Japanese soldiers might have pulled Chen into a concealed tunnel. But their bullets ricocheted harmlessly off the surface, which showed no damage despite being struck by dozens of rounds. They radioed for support, and within minutes a full platoon had surrounded the formation. Engineers brought demolition charges, planning to blow the rock apart and recover Chen or his body. But when the charges detonated, the rock remained intact, untouched by explosives that should have shattered volcanic basalt into fragments. The platoon sergeant, a veteran who'd survived every major Pacific battle, made the decision to mark the location and move on. Combat operations couldn't stop for one missing Marine. However mysterious the circumstances, Chen was listed as missing in action, presumed killed, and the war ground forward. By March 26th, when Iwo Jima was officially declared secure, the rock formation had been forgotten, just another piece of volcanic terrain on an island covered with unusual geological features. But Chen's rifle remained where he'd left it, leaning against the rock at the exact spot where he'd vanished. Marines passing the location over the following weeks noticed it but didn't disturb it, treating it as an informal memorial to a fallen comrade. And over the years, as typhoons battered the island and volcanic activity occasionally caused tremors, that rifle remained in place as if held by invisible hands that refused to let it fall. After the war, Iwo Jima was returned to Japanese control, though the United States maintained limited access for maintaining the memorials to fallen Marines. The island became a place of pilgrimage for veterans and families, a sacred ground where some of the Pacific War's fiercest fighting had occurred. But it was also largely uninhabited, with only a small Japanese self-defense force presence and occasional scientific teams studying the island's unique volcanic geology. In 2018, planning began for the 76th anniversary commemoration of the battle, scheduled for February 2021. As part of the preparations, a joint U.S.-Japanese archaeological team was assembled to survey the battlefield, document remaining artifacts, and ensure that memorial sites were properly maintained. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a geologist from the University of California, was assigned to study Iwo Jima's volcanic formations, comparing them to modern geological surveys to understand how the island had changed over 76 years. On January 12, 2021, while conducting surveys near Hill 362A, Dr. Mitchell's team detected an anomaly. Ground-penetrating radar showed a rock formation that appeared hollow with internal structures that didn't match volcanic basalt's typical composition. When they investigated in person, they found Marcus Chen's rifle, still leaning against the rock exactly where it had been placed 76 years earlier. The weapon was corroded but intact, its serial number still legible, allowing immediate identification as belonging to Corporal Marcus Chen, USMC, missing in action since March 4, 1945. Dr. Mitchell examined the rock formation closely and realized immediately that something was wrong. The surface wasn't volcanic basalt. Spectrographic analysis revealed a composition that matched no known terrestrial rock. The mineral ratios were impossible, suggesting formation under pressures and temperatures that couldn't exist in volcanic processes. And when she looked closely at the surface, she saw what Marcus Chen had seen 76 years earlier. Symbols. Thousands of them. Carved with precision that suggested advanced tools, arranged in patterns that hurt to observe directly, but seemed to convey meaning at a level deeper than conscious understanding. Dr. Mitchell contacted both American and Japanese authorities immediately. Within 48 hours, the site had been cordoned off and teams of specialists had arrived from multiple countries. What they found would challenge every assumption about Iwo Jima's geological history and raise questions about what might lie beneath the island's volcanic surface. Because the rock formation wasn't part of Iwo Jima. It was far older, possibly millions of years old, predating the volcanic activity that had created the island. And somehow it had been waiting beneath the lava flows and ash deposits, waiting to be revealed, waiting for someone like Marcus Chen to find it and attempt to understand what it meant. The investigation was about to reveal truths that military historians, geologists, and the families of missing servicemen weren't prepared to confront. Because Marcus Chen hadn't died on March 4, 1945. He'd discovered something that shouldn't exist on a Pacific island created by volcanic activity less than 1 million years ago. Something that had been waiting for human consciousness advanced enough to perceive it. And what was carved into that volcanic rock would prove that the Battle of Iwo Jima, one of history's most documented conflicts, had been fought over ground that held secrets far more significant than strategic military position. Dr. Mitchell's team worked for 3 weeks documenting the rock formation before attempting any invasive analysis. What they discovered challenged every principle of geology and archaeology they'd been taught. The symbols carved into the surface weren't decorative. They were functional, part of a technological system that operated on principles human science was only beginning to theorize. When subjected to electromagnetic scanning, the symbols lit up in patterns that suggested circuitry, information pathways, and storage mechanisms encoded directly into the crystalline structure of the rock itself. But it was the linguists who made the breakthrough that changed everything. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, a Japanese expert in ancient Pacific languages, recognized elements from Proto-Austronesian mixed with symbols that matched artifacts recovered from underwater sites throughout the Pacific. Sites that dated back 12,000 years or more, to a period when sea levels were dramatically lower and island chains that are now separated by deep ocean might have been connected by land bridges. The symbols told a story, but not in any conventional narrative structure. They transmitted information directly, bypassing language and accessing something deeper in human consciousness. When Dr. Nakamura touched the symbols in a specific sequence, following patterns that his instincts suggested, despite having no logical reason for the choice, the rock formation responded. A section of its surface became translucent, revealing an interior that shouldn't exist. The rock was hollow, containing a chamber approximately 3 meters in diameter, and inside that chamber was evidence of what had happened to Marcus Chen on March 4, 1945. The chamber was a preservation unit using technology that human science couldn't replicate, and suspended in some kind of stasis field that violated every known law of physics was Marcus Chen himself, exactly as he'd appeared 76 years earlier, 22 years old, in full combat gear, not dead, not exactly alive, existing in a state between moments, preserved with such precision that cellular decay had simply stopped at the molecular level. But Chen wasn't alone in the chamber. Surrounding him, arranged in a circle, were 6 other figures. Not human. Or rather, not entirely human. They appeared humanoid, but their proportions were wrong, their features too symmetrical, their skin showing patterns that suggested both biological and technological components. And they were ancient, far more ancient than Chen, their preservation suggesting they'd been in this chamber for thousands of years before a Marine from Seattle had stumbled into their final resting place. Dr. Mitchell's team stood before that translucent wall, staring at the impossible scene inside, and understood that Iwo Jima's significance went far beyond being a strategic military objective in 1945. The island was a repository, a storage facility for something that had existed in the Pacific long before human civilization. And Marcus Chen had discovered it at the worst possible moment during one of history's bloodiest battles, when no one had time to investigate mysteries that didn't involve killing enemy soldiers. The decision about what to do with the discovery was made at levels far above Dr. Mitchell's authority. The American and Japanese governments convened emergency meetings. Military officials, scientists, and intelligence operatives debated options for weeks while the site remained sealed and guarded. Eventually, a plan was approved that satisfied political concerns while advancing scientific understanding. The chamber would be opened, Marcus Chen would be extracted, and the truth about what existed beneath Iwo Jima would remain classified for at least 50 years, long enough that everyone currently involved would be dead before the information became public. The extraction operation took place on March 4, 2021, exactly 76 years after Chen's disappearance. Specialists in hazardous materials containment, wearing suits that could survive chemical and biological threats, entered the chamber through an opening that Dr. Nakamura had managed to activate by following the symbol's instructions. What they found inside challenged every assumption about consciousness, identity, and what it meant to be human. Marcus Chen was aware, not conscious in the conventional sense, but aware at some level that transcended normal human perception. Medical scanners detected minimal brain activity, but the patterns suggested he was experiencing time differently, perceiving all 76 years simultaneously rather than sequentially. He existed in every moment of his preservation, aware of the battle raging around him in 1945 and the archaeologists discovering him in 2021 and everything in between, all at once, eternally. The 6 non-human figures surrounding him told an even stranger story. Analysis of their remains, when specialists finally gained access, revealed DNA that was partly terrestrial and partly something else, showing markers that suggested genetic engineering at a level of sophistication human science was centuries away from achieving. They'd been human once or descended from humans, but transformed into something capable of existing in states that conventional biology couldn't support. And carved into the chamber walls, in the same symbols that covered the exterior, was an explanation that linguists would spend months translating. The chamber was a refuge, created by a civilization that had existed in the Pacific more than 12,000 years ago, before the catastrophic sea level rises that had submerged their cities and scattered their people. They'd developed technology that allowed consciousness to transcend individual mortality, existing in states that merged biological and technological components. But they'd also understood the danger of that technology, the risk that humans would lose their humanity in pursuit of transcendence. So they'd created these chambers, scattered across the Pacific in locations that would eventually become islands as warnings and repositories. Anyone with the right genetic markers, the right neurological patterns, who approached the chambers under the right conditions would be drawn inside, not trapped, invited, shown what was possible, given the choice to join the pattern or return to conventional existence. And Marcus Chen, walking toward that rock formation on March 4, 1945, had possessed those markers. His consciousness had resonated with the chamber's systems, activating preservation protocols that had been dormant for millennia. But Chen had made a different choice than the 6 figures who surrounded him. He'd chosen to observe rather than merge, to be preserved as a witness rather than transformed into something post-human. The chamber had honored that choice, maintaining him in stasis while the battle raged around him, while decades passed, while the world changed in ways he would never directly experience. He'd become a message, a warning, and a reminder that some thresholds should be approached with caution rather than crossed with abandon. The ethical debates about Chen's fate consumed military and medical communities for months. He existed in a state that challenged every definition of life and death. His body showed minimal signs of aging, maintained by the preservation field at the cellular level. But consciousness, identity, whether anything of Marcus Chen as he'd been in 1945 still existed, was a question that philosophers and neuroscientists couldn't answer with confidence. Eventually, the decision was made to maintain him in stasis, relocating his preservation unit to a secure facility where specialists could study the technology that sustained him. But they also contacted his family, specifically Ruth Chen's descendants, giving them the truth about what had happened to Marcus 76 years earlier. The family's reaction was mixed. Some found comfort in knowing Marcus hadn't died in combat. Others were horrified by the idea of their ancestor existing in an eternal present, neither living nor dead, trapped in a moment that never ended. In March 2022, a private memorial service was held on Iwo Jima, attended by Chen family members and descendants of the Marines who'd fought alongside Marcus. At the service, they dedicated a plaque near the rock formation, acknowledging Chen's service and sacrifice while carefully avoiding any mention of the circumstances of his preservation. The official story, the one told to historians and included in updated accounts of the battle, was that Chen's remains had been recovered during archaeological surveys and would be interred with military honors at a date to be determined. The truth remained classified. But the discovery of Chen and the chamber raised questions that authorities couldn't ignore. If one such repository existed on Iwo Jima, how many others were scattered across the Pacific? How many other servicemen during World War II had encountered these ancient preservation systems? And more disturbing, if the technology was 12,000 years old and still functional, what else might be buried beneath Pacific Islands, waiting to be discovered by the right person under the right conditions? Classified archaeological surveys were conducted across former Pacific battle sites: Guadalcanal, Peleliu, Saipan. Each island was scanned with equipment designed to detect the unique electromagnetic signatures of the preservation chambers. And on each island, they found evidence of similar structures, some intact, some damaged by volcanic activity or military operations. Each chamber contained evidence of the ancient civilization that had created them. And several contained preserved figures, both human and post-human, existing in the same impossible state as Marcus Chen. The most disturbing discovery came from Guadalcanal, where a chamber was found containing 12 American Marines from 1942, all preserved in stasis, all showing the same awareness patterns as Chen. They'd vanished during the campaign, listed as missing in action, and for 80 years they'd existed in a state between life and death, trapped in moments that never resolved. The decision about what to do with them, whether to maintain their preservation or attempt revival, became one of the most classified debates in military history. Dr. Mitchell's final report, submitted in August 2022 and immediately sealed at the highest classification level, concluded with observations that military authorities found deeply troubling. The preservation chambers aren't passive storage. They're active selection systems, identifying humans with specific genetic and neurological profiles and drawing them in. The probability that multiple servicemen during the Pacific War encountered these systems by chance is statistically impossible. Something was actively recruiting them, collecting specimens with the right characteristics, preserving them for purposes we don't yet understand. Marcus Chen wasn't a victim of circumstance. He was chosen, and if the chambers are still active, still selecting candidates, then the process is ongoing. We may be losing people to these systems right now and attributing their disappearances to natural causes when the truth is far stranger. The implications were staggering. If ancient technology scattered across the Pacific was actively collecting human specimens with specific characteristics, what was the purpose? Were the chambers preserving humans as a form of archive, a backup for the species in case of catastrophic loss? Or were they recruitment systems, selecting candidates for transformation into post-human states that the ancient civilization had considered evolution's next step? In 2024, 3 years after Chen's discovery, a U.S. Navy SEAL conducting training exercises on an uninhabited Pacific atoll reported encountering a rock formation with strange symbols. He'd felt drawn to it, compelled to investigate, and had experienced the same light distortions that Chen had described in his final moments. But unlike Chen, the SEAL had resisted, retreating before crossing whatever threshold the chamber represented. His report, immediately classified, was compared to Chen's case and found to match in every significant detail. The chambers were still active, still selecting, still offering choices that most humans couldn't comprehend. Marcus Chen remains in stasis in a facility whose location is known to fewer than 50 people globally. His preservation unit hums with energy that violates thermodynamics, maintaining his body in a state that shouldn't exist. Medical monitoring suggests he's aware of his surroundings in ways that transcend conventional consciousness. And occasionally, very occasionally, instruments detect patterns that suggest he's trying to communicate, sending messages encoded in the same electromagnetic frequencies that the chamber uses to maintain his preservation. Linguists have attempted to decode these signals, analyzing them for patterns that might represent language or meaning. What they've found suggests Chen is trying to warn us that the chambers aren't refugees or archives. They're bridges, doorways to states of existence that the ancient Pacific civilization had explored and eventually abandoned because the cost of transcendence was everything that made them human. They'd created the chambers as warnings, preserving examples of what they'd become and what they'd lost in the process. And Marcus Chen, trapped in eternal observation, was trying to ensure that future generations understood the message before making the same mistake. The Battle of Iwo Jima cost nearly 7,000 American lives and 21,000 Japanese lives. But it also cost something else, something that military histories never recorded: Marcus Chen's humanity, not his life, which continued in technical sense, but his ability to exist as an individual consciousness moving through time in a linear fashion. He'd been transformed into a warning system, a message preserved in stasis, spending 76 years between moments trying to ensure that humanity understood what waited beneath Pacific volcanic rock. His rifle still leans against that rock formation, maintained now by the Japanese Self-Defense Force as part of the memorial site. Tourists who visit Iwo Jima on the rare occasions when civilian access is permitted see it and are told it marks where a brave Marine made his last stand. They don't know that the Marine didn't die. They don't know that he exists 50 meters away in a chamber that defies physics, preserved by technology that predates civilization, trying desperately to communicate a warning that most humans aren't equipped to understand. And every year, on March 4th, instruments monitoring Chen's preservation unit detect increased activity, heightened electromagnetic emissions, patterns that suggest intense communication attempts. As if Chen experiences that day more vividly than others, reliving the moment of his choice, trying to warn anyone who might be listening that some thresholds shouldn't be crossed, that some choices can't be undone, and that humanity's greatest danger might not be external threats, but the temptation to transcend our limitations and lose everything that makes us human in the process. The volcanic rock of Iwo Jima holds more than the memory of a battle. It holds Marcus Chen. It holds the preserved remains of an ancient civilization that learned too late about the price of transcendence. And it holds a warning that military authorities pray remains classified forever, because the alternative, telling humanity that ancient technology waits beneath Pacific Islands offering choices that could end our species as we know it, might be more dangerous than any conventional military threat we've ever faced. Marcus Chen's sacrifice wasn't dying for his country. It was existing forever in a state between life and death, serving as a message that future generations might finally be wise enough to heed. Whether we are remains to be seen. This story was intense, but this one on the right is even more insane. You won't believe what they discovered.